What's going on? The Second World War, 1939 to 1945.
Looks like any war.
It was different. Death and destruction as always, but in a range of places all over the world. And due to warfare technology, the fighting was different too. New weapons, new tactics, and new experiences for the fighter.
What's this?
A database of the key people, places, and hardware involved in the war.
What am I supposed to do with it?
Select somewhere. Discover if and why the experience of war differed across the world.
Where should I start?
Try at the beginning.
All right.
"6 a.m. September the 1st, the Germans crossed the Polish frontier. They hit Poland with their new strategy, Blitzkrieg, lightning war. The key to Blitzkrieg was surprise, speed, and weight of attack, using two modern weapons, the tank and the warplane. First, Stuka dive bombers pinpointed enemy targets.
The scream of Stukas, like no sound ever heard in all the universe. It was the perfectly appalling wind that was most terrifying. Doors simply burst off their hinges. Panes of glass flew into splinters. The ceilings fell with hardly a noticeable sound in the earth-shaking uproar. Then, with a weird, smooth sound like the tearing of heavy silk, the neighboring houses began to collapse.
Paratroops were then dropped behind enemy lines and used to hold important communication points. Then heavy tanks would smash through the front. Medium tanks would open up the gap, followed by motorized infantry. Soldiers were able to move faster than ever before. The Polish Air Force was destroyed on the ground, so the Germans were able to bomb undefended Polish cities. Thousands of civilians were killed. Then on September the 17th, Soviet forces marched into eastern Poland. As agreed in the Nazi-Soviet pact, Poland would be divided between them.
What about the British and French? They could attack the Germans.
Good point. They promised to come to Poland's aid in the event of war, but the speed of the German attack left them totally unprepared. On October the 1st, just 1 month after the outbreak of war, German troops entered the Polish capital, Warsaw.
June 1940. We've reached a crisis in our history. 9 months since the fall of Poland, Britain stands alone against the German military machine. One by one, our allies fell. Norway, Denmark, then, in May, Holland's resistance was crushed in less than a week. We hoped to hold them back in Belgium, but it was not to be. The Germans struck at the hinge of the French line and created a bulge. The bulge became a gap. Belgium fell. We snatched back 340,000 from the beaches of Dunkirk, but their equipment lies abandoned. And now France has fallen too. Poor blind France, a pawn of the ruthless conqueror. We'll leave you with our new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, who I'm sure speaks the words in every British heart.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on beaches, landing grounds, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender.
Did they think they could win?
It's true that many people who knew the real situation were worried about Britain's chances of surviving a German attack. But in all public information, like the newsreel words used in the bulletin, the aim was to keep up people's hopes.
So did the Germans invade Britain?
They tried throughout the summer of 1940 in what became known as the Battle of Britain. A battle between the Royal Air Force and the German Luftwaffe for control of the air. If the German invasion of Britain was to succeed, then they needed to establish air superiority over the Channel and the south of England.
What was it like to fight like that?
The museum has a selection of interviews with British and German pilots. Which would you prefer?
British.
I was more afraid on the ground while waiting to take off. The thing that really frightened me was waiting for that tannoy either to scramble or the telephone to go. If the tannoy came on, not saying anything, I could be sick before we'd had time to talk.
They were long hours, boring hours, interspersed with moments of tremendous exhilaration.
slowly.
The great memory I have is being very tired. We were on readiness from 3:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night. On a bad day, we'd do 5 or 6 sorties against the enemy. We never had enough pilots. We had pilots, but they weren't trained.
You'd be up there in your tight little office, listening like a hawk and watching like a hawk. And then as you turn, when you take your decision, then you're committed. Everybody is. And then the shooting starts, and then, whoa, it's all over the sky.
If you did keep your finger on the button, your ammunition would expend itself in 14 seconds. You've got about 6 2-second bursts. And so I didn't start firing till I was very close.
Air fighting is impersonal because you're not thinking of people. You really aren't thinking when you see something in your sights that really isn't 1 man or 5 men if it's a bomber or whatever it is. It's a target.
One saw a lot of one's friends being burnt. Rather appallingly, occasionally you heard them being burnt because their radio was left on when they started being burnt. You could hear them screaming.
People often say, well, what did you think? All I thought was hate. I thought, who are these bastards who are flying in our sky, bombing our country with black crosses and swastikas all over their cursed aeroplanes?
Any claims, Johnny? 109 destroyed, Freddie, yes. Oh, good show.
One forgets about the Battle of Britain. It might have been frightening, like before race is frightening, but it was very exciting.
He can't really have enjoyed it.
Many talk of the exhilaration of battle. That's especially true in the air, where engagements are short, skillful, almost clinical. But as ever, there was a high price to pay. Over 3,000 British and German airmen died. Many more were permanently injured. But Hitler had suffered his first major setback.
June 1941. Britain is undefeated, but weak. We face a long, hard war, and no harder than in the Atlantic, where our convoys battle to deliver the vital goods we need. Any future victory must depend on Britain ruling the waves. Meanwhile, in Berlin, well, things must be pretty tight for Herr Hitler just now. We mucked up Mussolini's little plans in Greece. It was Hitler who came to his rescue. Then in the desert, the Italians were on the run. Again, Hitler bails him out. But as the Führer looks to the east, we can but wonder, will this be one front too far?
What does he mean, one front too far?
Hitler was about to take a gamble. By not defeating Britain, he was forced to leave troops in the west at the same time as moving east.
All right, I'll take the USSR and the Germans again. Is this just another Blitzkrieg?
It started out that way. Operation Barbarossa. 22nd of June, 1941, Hitler launched his attack on the Soviet Union. The Germans rolled over the Soviet defenses, and in the first 10 days, they knocked out over 1,000 Soviet tanks, much of the Air Force, and took 150,000 prisoners. Hitler was confident of a short war.
Why did Hitler have it so easy?
In spite of warnings from Western sources, Stalin was taken by surprise. He had removed some of our best officers, and the Soviet forces lacked leadership and equipment. Occasionally, trenches had to be dug with helmets since there were no spades.
The Russian people responded quickly. Millions volunteered to fight. Over 1,000 factories were moved to the east to keep the war effort going. The Germans miscalculated the numbers the Russians had to call upon, and the terrible roads.
How do you mean?
Nearly all our transport consisted of wheeled vehicles which could not move if the sand turned to mud. Rain reduced the panzer forces to stagnation. It was an extraordinary sight, with groups of them strung out over a 100-mile stretch, all stuck, until the sun came out and the ground dried.
The bad roads, vast distances, and stubborn Russian resistance all combined to slow the Germans down. This meant they had to face the snows of the Russian winter, for which they were not prepared. Most of the German generals wanted to stop and dig in. Hitler rejected a retreat.
What did this mean for the German soldiers?
Those Arctic blasts cut through our attacking troops. In a couple of days, there were 100,000 casualties from frostbite alone. A couple of days later, our winter clothing arrived. There were just 16 greatcoats to be shared among a battalion of 800 men. We came across some Russian corpses, their invaluable boots still frozen to their legs. Saw the legs off, we were ordered. We hacked off the dead men's legs below the knee and put the legs with their boots still attached in the ovens. Within 10 or 15 minutes, the legs were sufficiently thawed for us to strip off the vital boots. One of my men said to me yesterday, when you really get cold, you don't care whether you die of the cold or are shot. You only have one wish, to die as quickly as possible.
By December 1941, 740,000 Germans had died. Their advance stopped. Here was one place in the world where climate had defeated technology. The Russian front retained the most dreadful reputation for the German soldier.
December 1941. And now, pictures from a new theater of war. This film, just arrived in Britain, shows the cowardly raid on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor. There had been no declaration of war, but this lightning stroke, crippling the American Pacific Fleet, was long planned by the Japanese warlords and vital to their domination of East Asia. And as we know to our cost, Rangoon and Singapore have since fallen. At last, America fights alongside Britain and Russia. But today, we begin to realize that what we call the Far East is as close to us as the rest of this war.
Some of the bitterest fighting of the war took place in the Far East.
Okay, I'll have the Japanese.
Might I suggest the Battle of Midway?
How do you fight a naval war?
In the Pacific, two technologies combined, the warship and the aircraft. This was a new and frightening kind of battle. The ocean gives you no place to hide. There's only weather and distance to protect you. June 1942, the Japanese planned to take Hawaii, with its vital strategic importance, away from the Americans. To do this, they needed to engage and destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet.
Okay, load data.
Japan, 4 aircraft carriers with 270 planes, a fleet of 200 ships, and an advanced submarine force. America, 3 aircraft carriers with 233 planes, 76 ships, plus long-range air reconnaissance.
So the Japanese are stronger?
Ever since Pearl Harbor.
So what's the Japanese plan?
To stage a diversionary attack on the Aleutian Islands to the north.
Trap the Americans in between?
That was the idea. But first, secure Midway Island.
All right. So where's the American fleet?
Hawaii, or so the Japanese think.
They have to keep them there.
How?
Submarines so they won't be seen?
They tried that, but the subs arrived too late. The Americans, tipped off by their long-range reconnaissance planes, were already north of Midway, poised to attack the Japanese flank.
Did the Japanese know that?
No.
So they think it's safe to attack Midway?
Correct. But with their planes engaged on Midway, their carriers had no air cover. The Americans attacked. The Japanese carrier fleet was destroyed, and their attack on Midway had to be suspended. It was one of the fastest changes of fortune in naval history.
October 1942. Rough weather off the Solomon Islands. But weather won't stop the American Marines. They've a job to do. The Japanese, who've been having things far too much their own way in the islands of the South Pacific, were certainly caught this time. Just one step in the slow business of clearing them out. Right out. Here's a familiar scene, the Saharan sands. Yes, it's official. The Allies are finally going for the push. Not in Western Europe, not yet. That's the big one still to come. But here in Africa, we've plenty of old scores to settle and a few plum panzer divisions to muzzle for good.
Those bulletins are all so bloodthirsty.
Yes, but they were the words used at the time.
All right, I'll take North Africa.
In February 1941, Hitler sent one of his great tank commanders, General Rommel, to drive the British 8th Army out of North Africa.
Fighting a war in a desert. What was it like?
The environment put great demands on the technology and the soldiers.
The sun was a burning metallic monster in a cloudless sky under which you perspired until the moisture dripped from your nose, chin and elbows, and the sand that blew about all the time and penetrated your throat and eyes, caked itself upon the sweaty wetness of your face and clothes. Soon after sunrise, the flies arrive in hordes from nowhere, then plague us all through the day, swarming and buzzing round, trying desperately to land on our faces, in our eyes, ears and nostrils. And once they settled, they bite hard.
By August 1942, Rommel had pushed the British back to a defensive line at El Alamein in Egypt. At this stage, General Montgomery took over the 8th Army. A massive build-up in men and equipment followed.
The battle which is about to begin will be one of the most important battles in history. It'll be the turning point of the war. October the 23rd. Right on time, the big guns fire. The whole front leaps into life. 800 guns all along the front, each with hundreds of shells. They go on and on, firing. All gun crews were lying dead around their guns. Even in the slit trenches and dugouts, many were killed. We found one signal officer dead with a telephone still at his ear, and a man dead with a cigarette in one hand and a box of matches in the other.
On November the 3rd, Rommel's retreat began.
July 1943. The tide has turned against Hitler and the fascist Axis. These pictures show scenes from Stalingrad in the last few terrible weeks of its ordeal. Now the Germans are on the run. In Russia, the Red Army advances unstoppable. In North Africa, Rommel's bolted with sand between his toes. And now at last we hear of our successful invasion of Sicily, the first crucial step in the Allied re-entry into occupied Europe. There's no reason to get complacent. We've a long way to go yet, but the sweet smell of success hangs unmistakably in the air.
So how and why did the experience of war differ across the world?